Well, a great act to follow. Thank you. Thank you, Lisa, and all of our musicians, and David and Elaine for getting our service underway. It's such a great pleasure to be here with all of you and to share some thoughts with you. One of the most interesting things about being a perennial, now perennial, this is a new word that I've learned for someone who's old as the hills. And one of the most interesting things about being a perennial is observing the evolution of human behavior. Now, before the internet, we used to ponder over difficult questions, maybe not even terribly difficult questions, but we would talk about them and wonder about it. But now, with the internet, somebody immediately comes right up with the answer right away because they've Googled it and gotten it right away. So that takes all the fun out of that. But you know, and some of you I'm sure can agree with me on this, that I remember when Google was the name of a corporation. It was a noun. But now it's a very, very commonly used verb for finding things on the internet. But you know, we still have some questions that we cannot find the answers to on Google. And those are the fun questions that we get to talk about. Now, I was reminded several years ago, of course, most everything that I say took place several years ago, but I was in a CSL class, and we did this little exercise in which we worked as partners, and we looked each other in the eye, and we said, "What do you really want?" And we repeated the question over and over again. And each time, the answer had to be different. And it automatically became a little deeper, a little deeper. Now, the first answers were things like money and things and romance. And for me, I think my final answer, and I don't remember exactly, was more freedom. But my partner, who at the time was an interior designer, and she was a good friend of mine, and we went through practitioner training, and she told me later on, she became head of our youth ministry in our fairly large church. And she also developed things for the curriculum for the international youth program. She was totally involved in this. And she said, you know, it was in that exercise that we did a long time ago that I suddenly realized that I wanted to work with children. And that is the way some of the questions that we ask can evolve in our own minds. Now, more recently, I ran across a book called Ask Yourself This. And it's by a Unity minister by the name of Wendy Craig Purcell. And she says, the questions that we ask greatly influence the quality of our lives. So it behooves us to make sure that we are asking really good questions. And she quotes some well-known people, French anthropologist Claude Lévi-Strauss, who says the wise man doesn't give the right answers, he poses the right questions. And that goes for women as well, by the way. An American novelist, Lloyd Alexander, said, we learn more by looking for the answer and not finding it than we do from learning the answer itself. And author James Thurber, who's more familiar with us, it's better to know some of the questions than all of the answers. So that got me thinking, what questions should I be asking deeper than what am I going to have for supper tonight? And so this led me to searching for some answers in books. And the two books that I think I fall back on so frequently are this thing called You and this thing called Life, which are written by our founder, Ernest Holmes. And these questions that I came up with do not have definite answers, but it will help me, and they did help me understand more about possible answers. There are possible answers, but we don't know which ones they are. Now, as many of you know, I have a fairly casual relationship with the Bible, but I enjoy the teachings of Jesus that are printed in the New Testament. And one that has always puzzled me a little bit was, I believe, help thou my unbelief. I believe, help thou my unbelief. This is from the book of Mark, chapter 9, verse 24. Now, this apparently is about faith, developing faith. Now here we talk about faith, about having the faith of God, not faith in God, because we can never be separate from God. Therefore, having the faith of God is a more appropriate way for us to view it. And so the question I came up with for myself is, how can I have the unwavering faith of God that I deeply want to have? And I'm not sure I got the answer, but I came closer to it from Ernest Holmes in this thing called You. And he says, perhaps the greatest difficulty is that we try to make it too abstract. We're looking for answers out there somewhere. Now, I frequently declare that I'm a spiritual being having a human adventure. We say that a lot around here. But I'll tell you, I'm much more familiar with my human adventure than I am with my spiritual self. And so I'm not sure that's the way I should put it, but that's the way I like for it to be. So what Ernest is saying here is that we already know that we live. We know that we have a life that is people with events, persons, and happenings taking place all the time. Our thoughts, activities, affairs, circulation of blood in our bodies, and everything about it. We're familiar with all of that. And then he says, don't you think this is a good place to begin? And I thought, yep, I think that's it. If I look at all of the things in my environment and look at my body, I realize that this is God, and this is a good starting place to understand more about it. And so Ernest says, you already understand the presence of life. Your endeavor then is not so much to find God as to realize the presence is always with you. And your search culminates in the greatest of discoveries, finding that it is, that this God is at the very center of your being. Now, we're reminded of that in our benediction that we say here every week when we say, I can never be separate. These are not just words. These are feelings for us to internalize, because our feelings are the most powerful prayers that we ever can utter. Now, another question that I came up with, and this is one that I have received as a minister a lot, but I also have it for myself. And that is, what keeps us from experiencing the great good that we're told that is at the center of every person's being. And we hear about that, but we really don't feel it exactly. So what's behind that? What's keeping us from doing that? I have heard people say, and I agree with this, that it's like having water going through a hose, and you get a kink in the hose, and the water is cut off completely. But there's no shortage of water coming from the faucet. And what Holmes has to say about this is that the wall which keeps us from the greater good is built of mental blocks cemented together by fear and unbelief mixed with the mortar of negative experience. That's a nice picture that he's painting for us. And then he says, by completely destroying the wall, the view that the wall has obstructed can be seen in all its grandeur. The sun really never stops shining, and the river of life forever flows. Having destroyed this barrier, you may sit on the banks of this river contemplating the beauty of nature, or you may bathe in its refreshing coolness. And that's all good, but how do we get rid of the doggone wall? Okay, that's a question for us. So, it seems that one of these things that's blocking is doubt. And then fear keeps coming in all the time. And these, of course, doubts and fears began on the human level. They don't exist on the spiritual level. So how do we get there? Well, my suggestion is meditation, because I feel from my personal experience that when we meditate, we move ourselves to the spiritual level. What we might say is that we move to the secret place of the Most High. We like to talk about, in the Bible, they really like to talk about the secret place of the Most High. And so the secret place of the Most High is a wonderful experience of oneness with the Divine Spirit, oneness with the Spirit of the universe. And when we do that and spend time in meditation, now I think of meditation as a way of chipping against the wall. It certainly is possible that in meditation we could just make the wall go away completely, but more frequently we just chip away at it. But by daily meditation, and meditation is a pretty individual thing. All people don't meditate in the same way, but it all has the same result. So by chipping away with it, we can see those blocks fall away. Those blocks fall away and become stepping stones to faith, peace, beauty, and fear. We could get rid of the fear, and therefore we are open to deepening our faith and expanding our faith as we replace all of these negative conditions with a stronger faith. Now, the secret place of the Most High, as I've already said, is not a location, but a state of thought, inner awareness, a spiritual faith, and we're in it whenever we will to be in it. The realization that we can never be separate from Divine Spirit restores our belief and destroys the sense of negativity. Now, this reminds me also of a little thing I've heard about a guy asking the minister, or talking with the minister, and says, I just don't feel as close to God as I used to feel. And the minister says, who moved? And I must say that I've had that experience a few times in my life. And I realize it's a nice reminder that God never moves. God is always there. Now, the questions that I started thinking about made me think of one that I didn't want to ask myself. Reverend Chris Michaels in 2003 published a book called Your Soul's Assignment. That's a scary title, Your Soul's Assignment. And I was reluctant in reading that because I knew that it was going to make me ask, what is my soul's assignment? Now, Reverend Chris and lots of other people said that we all have a purpose. We're all here for a purpose. And that is what he meant by our soul's assignment. So I finally had to go in with this, and many people have said this so many times. I don't know if it's true for everyone or for anyone, but I know that it's true for me. And that's where the rub came in. Because I have argued with that for a big part of my life. It started when I was 19 years old. That was a long time ago. I was 19 years old, and I was a student at a Baptist college, Union University to be more specific about it. And I was studying biology and chemistry, and I loved biology and chemistry. But then I felt a silent whispering of an inner presence telling me that I should become a minister. Oh my God. And of course, being a Baptist and knowing that is the only religion I've ever known, I thought, oh, this is a call to become a Baptist minister. And I just could not envision myself as living my life as the way I had seen Baptist ministers living theirs or trying to live theirs. And of course, at a deeper level, I knew it would never work out for me. But I had thought that I might like to be a teacher, and then I thought, well, maybe my calling is actually to be a teacher. And so I decided that this call, that this voice to me was to become a teacher and not to become a preacher. And so I did that. And my first year of teaching was, I won't say it was a disaster, but it sure came close. And I realized at the end of that time that I never wanted to do that again. So I found other jobs, and they were more satisfying for me. Though 8 or 9 years later, I felt a little nagging, a little tugging at my heart that I needed to get back to my calling as a teacher, because I do feel that I had calling as a teacher. At that time, I was much better prepared. I was much more mature than I had been the first time. And so I got a job as a teacher in San Jose, California, and I worked as a secondary school science teacher, as many of you know, for over 30 years with great success and great satisfaction. But during the last 10 years of my employment as a teacher, I started attending a religious science church, a center for, as we call it now, Center for Spiritual Living. And this opened up a whole new world for me. it was something that I had never known anything about at all. And I hadn't been going to church for about 25 years, by the way, before I started going to this religious science church. So I started taking classes, and I embraced this philosophy because I thought, yeah, that's just what I've always believed. Now, I can go with that. That's not full of a lot of things telling me that I cannot be and I cannot do. And so after I retired, I started taking more. I actually had taken a lot of classes even before that, but I decided to take a bigger role. I was led to take a bigger role in the center there. And so I served on the board of trustees, and eventually I entered practitioner training and completed practitioner training. And as soon as I completed practitioner training, I started teaching classes in religious science. Well, I was back teaching again, so that felt good. I was back in that calling again. But then I started thinking about ministerial school. No way. In the United Church of Religious Science, which is what we were at that time, in order to become a minister, it was a demanding 3-year master's degree program. It was an accredited master's degree program. And this involved taking online classes from well-known professors, lots of internships, going to class all day long on Saturdays. And this was a requirement to be eligible to become a licensed minister. Now, it involved lots of internships, like doing things in the church, and we had lots of retreats and this sort of thing. It was very demanding. So, but there really wasn't any. I had looked at other ministerial schools around, but none of them were really appropriate for religious science. And I really did not want to become a minister, but I wanted to deepen my understanding and my awareness of the divine, of religious science. So I reluctantly entered the Holmes Institute of Consciousness Studies. I was 75 years old at that time. And so shortly after I entered ministerial school, which I loved the other people, the other students who by this time they're all ministers, or nearly all ministers. And so it was just wonderful to be in classes with them. And then I realized that I wasn't there to deepen my understanding of religious science, my knowledge, or my experience. I was there to fulfill a calling that I had gotten when I was 19 years old. And so I just went on, after I realized that, I just went straight for the ministerial path. And I jumped through all those hoops, and there were so many of them. But I never questioned. I never questioned what I was there for. I wrote all of those papers that we had to write. It was just so many of them. But I did it without complaining too much. And finally, the day that I got my ministerial license, I met Reverend Michael and Reverend Diane. And they invited me to come to MCCSL as a staff minister. And that is why That's why I frequently say that I was called to be a religious science minister when I was a Baptist. I was 19 years old. I had never heard of religious science, but I know that consciousness knew all about religious science. And I'm truly grateful to be a minister of religious science, and I have been now for 5 years. And I would like to leave you with 2 questions. You knew I was going to say that. And these are somewhat related. The first one is, what would you choose to do if you knew you could not fail? What would you choose to do if you knew you could not fail? And a related question, if money were no object, what would you choose to do? These are things for you to think about and chew on for the next few days. Thank you very much. Namaste.